Forces loyal to Libya's leader are striking back at their opponents. They've launched an attack on the closest opposition-held city to Tripoli. Friday's assault on AlJazeera by Gaddafi's men appeared to be the strongest yet. Several people died there, and there were more killed just outside Benghazi, where an explosion at an arms depot killed at least 12 people. Meanwhile, these pictures from AlJazeera appear to show anti-government protesters celebrating their takeover of Ras Lanuf. Ras Lanuf is a major oil port west of Benghazi. In the capital itself, security forces have used tear gas and live ammunition to smother new protests. Camille El-Hasni has the latest.
This is where forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi reportedly attempted to retake the town of AlJazeera from rebel hands. This amateur video, which cannot be verified, appears to show the chaos as protesters ran for cover. Witnesses described intense gun battles between residents and security forces. Libyan state television showed pro-government demonstrations in Tripoli, as well as the town of Zlitan, several kilometers to the east. Both are Gaddafi strongholds. But anti-government protests continued elsewhere, including in the capital itself, where there were clashes between the two sides. After Friday prayers in the Tajura district of eastern Tripoli, people took to the streets, calling for the Libyan leader and his inner circle to go. Heavy machine gun fire could be heard as pro-Gaddafi security forces fired tear gas to disperse the crowds. And on the outskirts of the major oil port of Ras Lanuf, heavy artillery fire was heard. The rebels claim to have taken control of the town's airport, and according to reports, they plan to follow up with an attack on a nearby army base. Heavy fighting was also reported near the town of Brega. A surgeon at the local hospital said most of the wounds were caused by bombs or rockets. And amid claims and counterclaims, reports came in of Gaddafi's forces bombing an arms depot outside Benghazi with many casualties. It appears that Gaddafi's fight back is well underway. Camille El-Hasni, AlJazeera.
2 U.S. transport planes have landed in Tunisia. They're carrying aid for refugees fleeing unrest in Libya. The supplies picked up at a U.S. base in Italy include blankets and water containers. As Bernard Smith reports, an organized international airlift has begun in earnest.
Thousands of Bangladeshis are the latest in a stream of refugees to make it across the border from Libya into Tunisia. Waiting for them, a tent camp that can house up to 20,000 people. It's already full. But aid from Europe and the United States is arriving, and the process of moving these people home is picking up. Britain, France and the US are providing aircraft to help the evacuation. The UN says that the number of refugees crossing into Tunisia has actually dropped significantly because the border there is now manned by heavily armed pro-Gaddafi forces. So almost all of Libya's neighbours could end up dealing with fleeing workers. Some have now fled through Algeria, further down Libya's western frontier. And up to 100,000 people may try to cross into Niger in the coming months. That's according to the UN. At Egypt's frontier with Libya, hundreds of African refugees are stranded in a border no man's land. Some have been there for days. Here, the Egyptian authorities have tightened security, fearing that mercenaries hired by Gaddafi may try to flee to Egypt. Bernard Smith, AlJazeera.
Now, in Benghazi itself, protesters gathered after Friday prayers in a show of strength for those still under government control in Tripoli. Tony Bertley has sent this report.
The weather nor Gaddafi's threats could stop them massing in the centre of Benghazi for Friday prayers. Tens of thousands gathered in defiance of their hated leader and in support of those still under government control in Tripoli. In the city where the uprising began, the cleric called for Gaddafi to step down, the people to stand up, and those with guns to come forward and fight for the liberation of the capital. These people remain resolute and determined, but that alone is not enough. They need something more. If anything, Gaddafi seems stronger and bolder than he was at the beginning. So the question is, what next? And what if the Libyan leader refuses to go? Will this civil uprising turn into a civil war? Many say that won't happen, but international rhetoric has increased. Direct pressure has slowed. Some feel the momentum of the uprising has slowed with it.
Gaddafi is in hiding. He is not representing anybody any longer. He is a coward and he won't challenge the people, and it is only a matter of time.
People here know Gaddafi has weathered international storms and sanctions before, most notably after the downing of Pan Am 103 more than 20 years ago, and there are still real concerns in free Libya.
We need to think of the life of the Libyans first as a priority, so we are asking for the help of the international community under the UN flag.
From the streets, though, there are no doubts. Those in Benghazi seem totally committed to the fight, wherever it may lead.
Let him drop bombs on us. We're not afraid of anything. We're not even afraid of his mercenaries.
Gaddafi has used that aerial threat a number of times in the last few days, and control of the skies is essential to complete liberation.
We know that this guy will commit a massacre in Tripoli today, and if the international community doesn't move, then it will be on their conscience.
Another victim of the rebellion is paraded through the streets of the city. It's almost a daily occurrence. The pain is still being felt here. Ahmed Sati was a 51-year-old civil servant who has just died from a bullet wound sustained during the demonstrations. His children lost a loving father and a man who wanted democracy. Even though Gaddafi is still in power, they don't feel his death was in vain.
My father did not die for nothing. He and the rest died for our beloved country.
With the death toll now said to have surpassed 1,000, the heart of the revolution is suffering. And throughout Libya today, there is still uncertainty, there is still anger, and there is still death. Tony Bertley, AlJazeera, Benghazi.
Now, earlier we spoke to Hamad, a police officer in Bishr, which is 20 kilometers west of AlJazeera. He says clashes continue in AlZawiya, where the uprising is seeing the fiercest fighting.
In terms of casualties in Zawiya, the latest death toll we have is 50 who have been killed by pro-Gaddafi forces. These figures are from early this evening. As for the wounded, there are around 300, but many more are incoming because the fighting continues in some places. So we cannot really confirm the final death toll as the situation is volatile. And I have just received info from the revolutionaries. They say that they have taken over the city of Ras Lanouf.
Clashes are broken out between security forces and protesters in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. We're being told demonstrators attempted to storm the state security headquarters. Fires have apparently broken out in the building. Unconfirmed reports say at least one person has been killed and 2 wounded. Let's hear now from Ismail Alexanderani, a journalist and human rights activist who's on the line now. What's the latest you can tell us about the situation outside that building?
It started after Al-Jum'ah prayer by a peaceful protest where people demanding demanding the police security state headquarters to be controlled by the military forces, and then state security officers and the central security forces started by Molotov bombs. Then people reacted by throwing them, stoning them. Then the state security forces shoot